we'll give it to Bo and Jay and Josh. Let's welcome them.
All right, thank you very much. I'm happy to see so many people here promptly right after lunch. Usually it's chaos. Today it was maybe managed chaos. Everybody managed to get here. We will, I'm sure, have some stragglers come in. So just make some room for them when they do come. This is going to be something very different. It's going to be an experiment for a hacker conference. We're going to try something where we're going to try and act like policymakers a little bit and take our DEF CON mindset and go to DC. Has anybody run like a tabletop disaster recovery or business continuity in their businesses? Oh, awesome. This is most people. It's good to see. Number one, it's good to see we've got so many people experienced. Number two, it's good to see so many organizations are actually doing those things. That's good. We're going to do something that's like that resembles it, but for, let's say, a whole of society, where a cyber crisis has broken out and it's hitting a very wide swath of society. More than just a single company or organization, something quite a bit bigger. All right, so when we think about adversaries, when we think about the bad guys, some of these types of people will feature in what we're doing today. And so I just want to very quickly give a thumbnail sketch of some of the adversary classes that we may be facing in our talk. We like to break these out into distinct classes because there are distinct approaches that you might deal with each class when you go to then make a response that's beyond just a technical response. From a technical response point of view, I can use the same techniques to block any adversary that uses a certain offensive capability. But when it comes to levers of public policy, we have very, very different levers we can use. So, for instance, if let me try and back up here and see if that
I don't know if it's
takes care of the echo. So in public policy, if we want to address a Russian threat, we can pull levers of economics. We can do things like block them from using the SWIFT system or other things like that. So just a very quick thumbnail. The upper left-hand corner here, we've got what you might describe as cyber terrorists, people who just want to cause chaos, destruction, to harm a particular worldview like the West or a free democratic society. You have hacktivists who may be doing some form of protest against something that they don't like online. So they may be taking their activism in a more harmful direction, a more consequential direction. You've got script kiddies who don't always know the consequences of what they're doing and may accidentally trigger some type of a mass cyber crisis. Nation states tend to be more restrained. They tend to be more deliberate, but they can also cause a wide-scale crisis, such as what we saw in Ukraine. There was a particular attack, and whether it was done by a government or not, it had the effect of essentially crippling the Ukrainian economy for the better part of probably a month, actually. And then you have cyber criminals. Typically, they look at how can I make some kind of a profit, usually a quick turn. This is things like ransomware. So how can I use that as a leverage point to make more money? And then the last one we've got there is Murphy's Law, because despite the best planning and the best preparation, anything that can go wrong will go wrong at some point.
And this gets to some of the reasons why we started this. So we've been calling this the Cyber 912 series of exercises from the Atlanta Council. And we called it Cyber 912 because a lot of us really freaking hated that a lot of DC and others would keep talking about a Cyber 9/11 or a Cyber Pearl Harbor. And we're like, we don't think that means what you think it means. So we said, Cyber 912, let's take this, what we think is kind of a dumb way to talk about it, and say, well, what happens the day after? So let's try and appropriate this and then say, all right, let's make it mean something. So something bad has happened. What do we do now? And we've done these in a lot of different ways. We'll do these out at, for example, RSA, where we get people that, like the media team is David Sanger and Alan Nakashima. And for folks from Dark Reading or others that are the real media team, or the White House team are folks that are or currently had been from the White House. And there we do it to try and bang different adversary groups or make them think differently about what they're going to do. This year at RSA, we replayed the election. And it was amazing to see the election hacks. And it was amazing to see what the journalists thought they would do differently, what the FBI and NSA and NSC thought they would do differently. Other times we do it like this, in saying, well, now let's try and get together and give some exposure to those guys. It's kind of giving the policymakers exposure to the technology and looking at our vulnerabilities and thinking through how it might go wrong or how someone might make it go wrong. And how does which group is doing it to you change the way that you might think about responding? And for events like this, and like Bo said, this is the first time we're doing it at a real hacker conference. And so here, you guys generally know the technology better, but we're doing it in part so that you can get some of the exposure to, well, how do the policymakers think about this? What are the levers beyond the technological ones, the ones in the zeros, that we can bring to bear? And so that's what we'll be doing over the course of the next hour and a half or so, is we'll give you some of this introduction about some of the ways that we think about this, just to prime you, especially if you haven't done war games a lot. And then we'll be breaking up into teams, and we'll have some policy people at each table, with each team, and start walking through and saying, all right, here's the first scenario inject, here's the second scenario inject. What do you think we ought to do as technologists? Because we're all here technologists in general. But then also starting to say, all right, well, how would you do this differently if you were thinking about media, or if you were thinking about White House, if you were thinking about military, if you're thinking about state and local, if you're thinking about FDA. And so that's what we'll be rolling through here.
So just like the adversaries come in numbers, the defenders also come in numbers, many different types, many different skill sets. So this is Josh's hated DC universe. I picked that partially to antagonize him because that's just fun.
Well, none of them have good mustaches, so to me it's all kind of,
yeah, that's right.
All kind of a wash.
But also partially to show the diversity of approaches. Some people are going to be really, really fast, and maybe that's industry. Some people are going to be really, really strong, and maybe that's government with the military. Some people are going to be really, really careful, and maybe that's some of civil society. So it takes all parts of society to build a response that's going to be a comprehensive response that will optimize for each of the stakeholders. And each of them brings certain superpowers. And you can play the superpowers against the supervillains. And where adversaries have certain modus operandi, you can pair up superheroes who will also have certain modes of operation to counter those adversaries. And Josh has got a couple of great talks from RSA in past years with, I believe that was with David Etchew, looking at this in a lot more detail and organizational, a single organization. But the same thought applies, just like in the last session before we broke for lunch. We had a lot of people talking about a bunch of different approaches that work within a single organization, as well as more broadly across a nation or across a society. And we have the same thing that can work here. This is Jada, do you want to add something before we moved on?
It just catches me. When you're in DC, if you spend a lot of time in DC, we do, so you don't have to. They talk a lot about, well, the capability intent of the bad guys. And they never, what can we do to change, let's do cyber deterrence to change the capabilities intent of the bad guys. And they don't think about the capability intent of the good guys, the people that want to help. And that's why I love Am The Cavalry, because the Cavalry's been all about how do we focus on the capability intent of the people that want to roll up their sleeves and help. How can we further enroll them? So thanks for being here today.
So this is a stakeholder mapping of the healthcare space. And it's incomplete because any stakeholder mapping is incomplete that's above the level of individual people. But this one captures most of the groups. And we did this as a part of something that we did called CyberMed RX a couple of years ago, where we brought together all of these diverse stakeholder types and caused them to have interactions with each other, and most of them for the very first time. And the perspectives that each of them have is very, very different. If you have, for instance, a patient, they'll have a different perspective than a security researcher. And a healthcare provider, a hospital, will have a very different perspective from a medical device maker. But if you get them all together, then they can no longer work in silos. They have to work together towards a common problem. And that's one of the things that we did at that event. That's one of the things we want to do here. And we want to also simulate it within a particular domain. And this healthcare piece is going to be particularly relevant for our scenario today.
Yeah, maybe we tipped our hand at what the scenario is going to be today. Maybe you might have guessed at it because it was cavalry room that maybe it was going to be a medical device kind of scenario. But
you're getting like a
medical device
7-minute head start on this. So guys, don't lose that advantage. And Josh, I know you've been very, very close to healthcare in the past year. If you want to say something, feel free to jump up and put your voice in. One of the things we want to do, whoops, my autoplay is going. Uh-oh. Where am I? Okay. So one of the things we want to do is we want to have an opportunity to give you a scenario, break up into groups, and then help solve the scenario as an individual group, and then report out. This is the basic outline and flow of the scenario, and we can put this back up for you. And this is the overview and agenda. Oh man, got autoplay working. This is the rough sketch of an agenda that we've outlined for today. Wanted to do an introduction, give an overview, walk through the scenario, and then get into a couple of different what we call moves along the scenario. So generally you have something that happens, and then you have new information that comes in, an escalation, a lateral movement, something like that compels you to have a different response after the first response. And it's a progressively increasing series of events where you have higher fidelity of information, but also new information and new events that are occurring in real time that you have to respond to.
And we'll be asking, so we'll probably aim for 4, maybe 5 groups. We've got some policy experts and others, and we'll try to seed 1 or 2 per group that can help you think about the issues in case you don't know the policy or you don't know the medical devices. Bo and I, maybe Josh, will be floating around and help answer questions. We'll need 1 person from that group that will kind of be taking notes and can report out as part of the debrief. And we'll debrief each of the groups then. Bo, Josh, and I can be asking questions. What did you think about this? What happened? What would you do differently if it were this? Because that's what happens when you're in the policy, in the policy field, or when you're briefing your boss. And then we'll do the second inject, second debrief, and then a summary.
Yeah. All right. So at this point, we're going to break up into teams. So there's about 60 people in the room. Jay, what do you think about 5 teams?
Yeah, let's go.
5 teams, and we'll try and balance it so that each team has the right type of people. And we can just coalesce around these tables. This is the activity portion of the day.
Yay!
So if we can stand up. Oh, somebody's already leaving. Oh. Yeah. Bye-bye. We will miss you. But you made a seat available for someone else to come and join. So welcome.
Yeah,
and if we could have maybe a couple of groups here, and then 1, 2, 3 in the back, if we could break it up that way.
1, 2, yeah. Maybe if these couple of teams can come, we can just kind of sit around the edge and then thank all.
All right. So welcome back. Seems like we've got our groups formed pretty well.
That actually went a lot more smoothly than we'd anticipated. So
yeah, this is by the way, this is much better than when we do this in DC and we have to make the policymakers make new friends. They're not too comfortable with that most of the time.
And they're the extroverts, so I don't know why they. Right. I don't know what their excuse is.
So thanks for participating. We've got our 5 groups now. One thing, by the way, we're going to be coming around and taking photos. This gracious gentleman over here in the bright pink shirt is going to be coming around and taking your photo. If you don't want a photo taken, if you don't want to be on the record, just flag it and say, not me, not me.
Just give me a quick hand and I will make sure I do not get you.
But other than that, most of this is going to be participatory within your teams. As we said, we'll give you the scenario, we'll walk through it, and then we will allow you to talk, deliberate. We'll be available to answer questions, to give you a little bit more info if you need a little bit of coaching to help you be a Sherpa guide through the process, and or to fill in for any types of roles that might be missing on your team, or to delegate, hey, you're the media person on your team. Come up with the best media response to this. I wanted to briefly go over what some of those roles will look like so that we're all better equipped to be able to answer those. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I just want to tease it up for you so that you know what this will look like, so that then you can ask smarter questions in the end. You'll probably have someone sitting around the table who's got more expertise in one of these topics than I will. So feel free to use them as your expert witness. One of the main things that we want to get out of this is we want you to empathize and understand what a policymaker has at their disposal. The abilities that they have, the capabilities that they have to pull certain levers of power and control that you might not otherwise ever be exposed to if you're just working in a more technical position within a single organization. And policymakers, as I found out in DC, have a great amount of power domestically as well as internationally. And learning some of the things that they can potentially do really enlightened me as I went from kind of this community into more of a public policy focused into a DC crowd. Policymakers can be anyone across the board: legislators, regulators, government agency, judicial system. That can be state, local, federal. Can be all up and down the way. They all have different authorities, and they tend to stay within their swim lanes. I don't expect you to know what those swim lanes are right now for the purposes of this. When we do this out at RSA, and we've got some of the actual policy.
Someone in each group generally knows.
Yeah.
I think
and we've done a pretty good job of bringing in some policy people who will know the lay of the land for you, so you won't have to do too much guessing at this. The types of levers that they have, and Jay can build on any of these that I miss or butcher, is diplomatic, so you can talk to other nations, you can talk to other states. You can have an economic lever, so you can do things like shut off the access to the SWIFT network, to the banking network. You can do things like economic sanctions. You can pull together a military response to either move military around in a threatening gesture or actually deploy military somewhere. Law enforcement response, so you can internally and domestically task law enforcement to look at something. You can use a diplomatic lever, for instance, to ask another country to use their law enforcement mechanism. There's also a regulatory lever, which is longer term. It tends to have effects that pay off over years rather than days. And then there's the public-private partnership, which is essentially government working closely together with industry in order to get the best out of each, is the hope and aspiration for that. Anything else to add to
No,
levers? I think policymakers also look at what?
That's okay.
They look at different types of mechanisms that you could use those levers. And again, don't expect you to know all of these and keep them in your mind, but just to prime you for asking questions later. Things like thresholds. At what point are we at war? How do we escalate versus de-escalate a situation? How do we enforce something in a practical manner? What are the types of authorities and swim lanes that exist, and how do you use those? How comprehensive is a solution? We say to patch, but does it ever really get to 100%? How long are these things going to take, and does that match the timeline in which we need to respond? And then some types of signaling or deterrence mechanisms, as we talked about in the last panel. There's probably not enough booze in Vegas in order to get past the end of the deterrence conversation. The types of organizations that exist: state, local, federal. In this particular scenario, as I mentioned, it's going to be around healthcare. So you have a specific call out here for the federal health agencies and then the national security agencies. And I use that as a plural, not a specific NSA, like DHS, Military National Guard, National Security Council, and others. Within this, we also have private sector, device makers, hospitals, insurers, security companies. This is the industry role. Most of you work in industry, so I don't expect this to be too difficult for you to imagine. Then the media. The media is essentially the voice of the public. They're the ones trying to connect and trying to engage public to keep them aware, as well as to mobilize them for certain purposes. All right, so here's the scenario, the part you were all waiting for. The date, July 3rd, 2020. The geopolitics. We've got some tight congressional and gubernatorial races coming up. U.S. and China are in a trade war over the one China policy. Russian influence operations have halted after different countries banded together and did some economic sanctions against Russia. North Korea is escalating its attacks against South Korean critical infrastructure. Le Pen was defeated. Merkel and May were both reelected. There's a group called Nova-Non, which has sprung up. They're a hacktivist group. They're right-wing rather than left-wing, and they target international organizations trying to destabilize the global world order as they see it. ISIS is basically stuck in Raqqa, and they're not getting out. They've expanded their transnational footprint, however, and they've done a lot more on recruiting and impacting people at home. And then the Iranian nuclear deal has fallen through, unfortunately, and their cyber capabilities have greatly escalated. So, first move. Here's the scenario. It's Thursday, July 3rd, 2020 at 8 p.m. This is set in Phoenix. So, dear Arizona Hospital Administration, we have helped you out by securing your insecure passwords and patching your systems. We humbly request an honorarium of $300,000 in Bitcoin within the next 4 hours, or we will leave you in a worse state than we found you. So this is a message that was sent to the administration of a hospital in Arizona, signed by members of a non-IT, don't know who that group is. It may be a front group. It may be some new hacktivist group. It may be just some random group of people. The preliminary technical analysis shows multiple capabilities in the malware. There's a known default password for imaging devices, building automation, et cetera. That's what it takes advantage of to get in. So those might be some of the targets, is imaging devices and building automation. It's spread through a new remote code execution flaw in Microsoft Windows, MS-19-104. It disables remote administration capabilities that are common in enterprises, so you can't get back in remotely. You would have to go on foot and fix these things in person. And it patches the flaw, so you can't use that to get in, and then changes the default passwords so that you can't get in through the default passwords. The analysis that we have to date, this is 45 minutes after the message came in. This is an extortionware threat, which is distinct from ransomware in that it targets an entire system or a company rather than an individual device. They're asking for $300,000 in Bitcoin at midnight on July 4th. The affected systems seem to be, based on anecdotal evidence, building systems, workstations, electronic medical records, imaging, and maybe others. There might be others that are dormant out there waiting and we don't know about them yet, or they haven't caused a big enough problem. So the questions we have for you as groups: who is doing this? What are they planning? What's going to be the next steps? What are the potential impacts at a societal level, patient care in particular here? Who would take which steps and when of the stakeholder groups that we outlined? And then how is the media and the public responding to this? And keep in mind the time scale and context. For the non-Americans in the crowd, July 4th is one of our biggest national holidays. And at 8 p.m. the night before that, pretty much everybody is off work. Banks are shut. Administration will be hard to reach because they're probably out of town. Anything to add, Jay, before we break and go to the groups?
No, I think let's figure 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
I think we can probably do. I think we can even do 10. Let's check in at quarter till, and then we'll see how we do.
Yep.
Just before that, as you go to break, I have actually something to say. This is Josh's 5th year as a track director. Thank you. Awesome. This is Josh's 5th year as a track director for BSides Las Vegas.
And in honor of that, we have a pinning ceremony for him that we like. Yeah, if you come on up here.
Thank you for your diligent service. We expect more from you in the future. Don't fuck it up.
Hey, thank you for giving us space to do good work for 5 years. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
5 more to come.
Thank you.
All right, so within our groups, we're going to talk about this scenario. What would each of the stakeholder groups likely do to respond? This will require thinking beyond just the technical response, and how do you do things that are well past that. As Jay said, we'll get back together at about quarter till, so you've got about 10 minutes to discuss amongst yourselves. We don't have the Jeopardy theme, but we could play that if we had it. Did you have a question to ask?
Yeah, because it makes a little bit on what you do. How big is the hospital?
How big is the hospital? Good question. How big is the hospital? What's the budget? Let's say they're a 10 hospital group, maybe a couple of hundred beds. The budget would be enough to have 2 security people on staff. Is that good enough?
200 patients?
Annual revenue?
Man, you're making me guess.
$300,000 ransom, it makes a difference on your
Oh, yes.
Some people pay, some people don't. Some people don't have it.
You're right. So that's 2 full-time employees, and they've got 2 security staff. So I'm guessing that that's probably 1% of their revenue. So that means add 2 zeros to that. So 30 million in revenue. Just going off the back of the napkin.
That sounded pretty good.
That's a good question.
Wow, all right.
Doug.
All right.
So if we're looking at that percentage of security personnel versus enterprise, how do we know this much about the malware this early?
We have help. So let's say we've got an analytics firm that looks at malware, and we send it off to them, and we got something back from them.
Especially because we're doing a compressed version of this, we have a term in Cyber 912 Student Challenge, which is don't fight the scenario.
Yes. All right, so go. If you've got individual questions, we can come around and answer them. One of the things you can also outline in your response is what assumptions you've had to make, therefore what investigation and questions you would have to ask, and that's perfectly acceptable.
Cyber insurance?
Sure. That sounds like a good question to ask. All right. We'll come back. We'll come around, and we'll come back to you in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, about 10 till. And I don't want to throw off your deliberations, but there's a small additional inject.
Uh-oh, something new. Something new started.
This has started to hit the media right while you're in the middle of your incident response, and it started to show up on some of the national media. So please continue to think about how you're going to respond to that. And the president just tweeted it out. Arizona hospitals can't protect its patients. I prefer hospitals that don't get ransomed. Sad.
All right. It's time.
Ding, ding, ding.
The bell is ringing. We need a decision. We need to have a decision to be able to present on behalf of the hospital. Go. All right. I'll try to do that. I'm not good at it. All right. It's time. Your hospital system has been asked to come and brief the governor on what your plan is. We need 1 delegate from each table to come up and brief out what you're going to do so that the governor can take the right action, whether that's inform the media, free up cash, do other types of things. So figure out very quickly amongst your group who is going to do it. Bring them up here.
Oh, let's do it out of the table. Let's do it.
For filming, it's a little bit
okay,
easier.
yeah, got it. All right, nope.
Who's bravest to go first?
Dun, dun, dun. All right, we've got someone standing up. All right.
Hey! All right, let's get the mic. for Sean?
Close the camera. Can you turn the camera off?
Do we want to turn the camera off or keep it on?
Or
For him, yeah.
Okay. For him, cut the camera. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you.
You don't have to say who you're from either.
Which is good because I actually work in healthcare, and
Hooray!
the
Yay!
whole answer to this is obviously not reflect anyone's job, organization, or anything like that. But honestly, 4 hours is a really short period of time that can be about $300,000 to make that decision. So obviously, at any point in time, CEO, legal, and PR, media relations, whatever you want to call it, are always going to be engaged from the start. Different couple of bridges going along at the same time for the technical bridge, which will be troubleshooting the issue, as well as the management response based on what's being found. A couple different things to consider here. Affected systems are building, AC, elevators. If AC and elevators are affected, I also am concerned about my power. And for anyone who's in a critical system or ICU or anything like that, I'm worried about my battery backups failing. Because I don't know how many pen tests I've done in the past where I've actually had default credentials and I could have taken down a state building. I'm not going to name a state because, well, NDAs and stuff. But so I'm really worried about the affected systems and taking down even the stuff that would normally be on battery backup and on generator. Okay. EMR, obviously I can't see pre-existing conditions if my EMR is down. So I'm really worried about my patients and getting them back on, basically seeing what's going on with them. Imaging. Especially emergency imaging. I think first team here, Team Phoenix, Firebird, prefer Fireball. Anyways, same kind of thing. Obviously, get someone diverting from those affected facilities from the start in order to basically limit the number of patients we have to worry about. Okay, definitely there. Potentially others. I would start to really, if I'm seeing this number of systems that are affected, there's probably a pivot point on my network in order to get to all these where systems started to basically start doing some kind of scanning, enumeration, or something like that. That's on the technical response side. So I'm really kind of hoping I can start to track that down with the technical folks, but I only got 2 people. On the security side, really try and leverage some of my, hopefully, admins or my desktop support people, get some kind of idea what they might be looking for in a SIM, because, people with a $30,000 budget or a $30 million budget really have, robust SIMs. But anyways, I'm going to go with that and try. So definitely going to look to see what the actual entry point was. At this point, I may actually consider, depending on what my response is going to be. Now, you're going to come to the question, am I going to actually pay or not? I'll come to that. But the question is, if I can find how they got in and what they've done, I'm going to use those IOCs. Same thing I mentioned here, the different ISAC groups, InfoGuard, FBI, leverage any kind of law enforcement, high side research I may have access to in order to see what else have they done, where else have they compromised. Because there may be a pattern with this particular actor. This actor may actually, if you pay, maybe they will give you back your records. Maybe they will give you back your systems. At that point in time, I'm in a much better place where I can actually leverage whether or not I recommend to my management saying, hey, you know what? In the past, 6 people or 6 other organizations across the country in the last 24 hours have actually paid, and guess what? They got their data back, and they're back up and running. So that may be something we got to leverage there is with the research side for attribution. Who is actually responsible for this? So will I pay? It really depends on what comes back with that high side research, or just the research within the other organizations. That could be nationwide. It could be worldwide.
And so the governor looks at you with his steely eyes and says, well, I had a regularly scheduled call already with Secretary Kelly at DHS and Tom Bossert, the President's Homeland Security Advisor. How bad is this going to get? I mean, do I need to prep them for something on this? Or it sounds like you have it under control, but what do you want me to tell them?
I can block off our network for our particular systems, but our systems that we use are used in organizations throughout the state, throughout the nation. So I can't tell you how bad this is going to get, but the chances are this will escalate if we are, depending on where we are with how many other organizations have already been compromised using same sort of tactics.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay, who's going to be the next victim? I mean,
by the way, big fan of negotiating, my face says.
big fan of negotiating.
Well, think about it. How many?
Alex, is it going to be you? All right. Alex, come on up. And if we can, we've already heard a lot of really good answers, really good solutions. If you can do like a delta against that'll help us speed up in time.
So we from Team Princess Buttercup have the following in mind. First thing, obviously, we work on rerouting care. I think a lot of that's been covered. But we do a couple of other things. I think one of the first ones is we would try and immediately get power generators for air conditioning units. One of the points that was made was it's July 3rd in Phoenix. It's incredibly hot, which threatens patient care. Patient care is the first thing that we're going to be walking through. We'll be triaging different patients, not just by critical needs and rerouting them, but we would also be doing things like prioritizing which patients we should print out records for and images based on their criticality of condition. So it's not just about triaging IT systems, it's about triaging patient care. Some of the other things that we would do, I think our first phone call is going to be to, the trusted computing guys at Microsoft of like, WTF, mate, like, what's going on with this? A couple of things that we would do to be able to facilitate that, as the point was made earlier, that common infrastructure is shared and this is a common mode failure. We would be working with our incident response teams to try and identify not just what IOCs, but trying to image the appropriate systems, take those, ship them off to Microsoft and to others to help with the response. We would also be working with our Office of General Counsel for a couple of reasons. One of the first ones would be to define, assuming that we have cyber liability insurance, which totally pays out. We'd be wanting to define whether or not this is actually in or out of scope of policy. And that's going to help us inform whether or not we're going to make a payment decision. Because this isn't technically a loss, right? We're paying an extortion fee. As opposed to we lost records, we have to pay out on the fines that are associated with the loss of the records. So we'd be checking our cybersecurity liability insurance policies. And then secondly from that, I think we'd also be working with other hospitals to determine whether or not this is a coordinated attack or if it's singular. If it is coordinated, right, then if the policy for us doesn't have the ability to breach the threshold of minimum payment requirements, then there's an opportunity or at least a possibility of pooling together funds amongst many hospitals who might be under the simultaneous type of attack. Crisis communications, now that this has delightfully hit the media, that's probably one of the first things that we would do, but we would, try and assure patients that primary care is being satisfied, but that we can't take on any other individuals. And so the message that we would make is not just, we're trying to get this covered, but also for lack of a better term, don't come here. Which is something that, while may not immediately work in our favor, still is in the best interest of primary care. And I think the last thing, that we talked about would be to try and do some basic implementation of network segmentation for those primary or critical systems, even while they're in production, is to say like, hey, look, we have these 5 really critical systems, and while we know that there's an exploitation in play, we're going to do our very best to, gap those from the rest of the network so that maybe, the exploit doesn't actually run and drop. Even though it's there, if we can, take out the control plane or communications channel, we increase our chances. So those would be some of the things that are in the Delta.
The governor looks at you with increasingly weary eyes and says,
they're not steely?
Not anymore. He said, I just heard from Senator McCain's office, and because over the summer break, the senator had been planning on he's actually one of the patients at one of your hospitals right now because he had his surgery coming up.
Awesome.
How does that change? And the person that talked to me, the governor said, thought this might even be about the senator and not even about you. Does that change anything about what you're up to?
Yeah, a couple of things. First one, I would just make sure that never mind, I was going to go up to the voting record, but it's cool. First thing that I think I would look at is, in that situation that does change it, right? Given the geopolitical, kind of backlog that you'd given us, I think a couple of things changed. The first one is then we can't just assume that this is, a generalized attack, or that we fallen victim because of any number of practices. That would require us to include, first contacting, as per protocol, Capitol Police, Federal Bureau of Investigation, some of the other intelligence organizations and agencies. While this sounds terrible to say out loud, having a high-profile individual may actually get us more opportunity for assistance from the federal government. And while that doesn't sound particularly pleasant, there's hundreds of hospitals in our state, and ours has our state senator. And so, shouldn't you come in and help us out, or even help us pay the bounty? Because there is, K&R insurance I would say that this would fall under kidnapping and ransom.
Fascinating.
Very good.
Well, that was a way better answer than I was expecting. That was awesome.
I want to drop this mic.
Jay, you did ask that we have a ringer on each team, right?
Yeah, well, I feel wrong, yeah.
Okay. All right. Next up. And again, just do the delta between what everybody else has said and what you guys wanted to do.
So one of the things first is that we wanted to do when we're responding is basically, hit our phone tree, Everbridge, whatever you have, and start making sure that patients are safe, paramount above everything else. Once that's taken care of, splitting up and getting everybody on site and splitting things up into teams. So you have your cyber team, you've got your IT team, you've got your media, PR, and your medical personnel doing, I can't speak to that because I know nothing about that, but I know they've got their teams. So they split up and they start doing their own triages according to how they see fit. At that point in time, we would be getting our cyber response team, whoever we got on retainer, in the air, letting them know. We are on July 4th, the day before July 4th, at 6 in the evening. It's a really popular time for IR teams to be getting calls, but it does happen, and it's going to happen now. So that happens, and we notify the FBI, the NH-CERT. Just a second, I've got 2 sets of notes here.
That's twice as many as the other groups.
Yeah. And just a second here. Notify local government. So if things are going bad and things do happen to go down, which we don't know if they're going down yet, but if that does happen, we need the other hospitals in the area to know that what's going on. So they have to be able to, bring in their own people, maybe have to take in a higher influx of people. The 911 systems have to know, hey, don't route anybody to this hospital. All these calls have to be going elsewhere. So fire needs to know, and police, everybody needs to know what's going on, so that they can respond accordingly, because they're all incident responders as well. Start doing a risk assessment. Execute our cyber insurance if we've got it, or any other insurances. Let's see here. Start preparing to go to pen and paper if we have to. We haven't done that yet. We think it might be kind of hard to get 300K in Bitcoin, and that might flag a few things when it comes down to money laundering. When you're trying to get that money that fast and trying to push it out, you may experience a few problems with that. So we can start trying to, but that might not work out. So we have to be prepared for that. Paying might still happen, but at this point in time, we don't know if it's the right thing to do or even if we can do it. Then internally. So I can speak to IR internally. So segmenting the network is a good thing. Getting your control systems separate. So anything that moves patients. So if you do have to start moving patients out of the hospital, you can. So elevators have to be running. So isolating those PLCs, all those control systems from each other. And then ICUs, anything that you can take offline if you can. If you can't, segment it. And then trying to save some of the data. So let's say this is a really bad malware and it just blows up everything and destroys all your evidence. Well, evidence can't be destroyed if it's turned off. So if it's got hard disks, pull the power. If you've got log servers, they're not critical. Pull the power. Shut them down, bring them down gracefully, reimage them, and then take care of that stuff later. If you've got a Active Directory cluster running, take part of your cluster out. Leave the rest up. And then you can go back to that system if the rest of the system self-destruct and maybe salvage something. And we can get into side channel attacks and extracting passwords through DMA or whatever, but there are ways around this. Let's see. And I guess we kind of have to wait to see what comes up next. I guess the other thing is really, really focus on the people who are in beds who may die if bad things happen.
Yeah. And the governor looks at you with his steely and increasingly weary eyes, and he asks you, do you pay?
Do you pay? I honestly, in a tabletop, I would have to ask you, like, can we pay? Can we get 300K in Bitcoin purchased? Can we move it through? Because a lot of those exchanges won't
Assuming
push that
you
sort of
can
money.
take care of the logistics, and it's just a button push. You push the button.
It turns out that at the Phoenix Convention Center, there's a whole distributed ledger convention going on, and they just put in the new Bitcoin ATMs that have a $500,000 limit. So you can just bring your impact card down.
In this case, maybe you do. I want to talk to the rest of my team. I don't know enough about what the liability would be with this. The other thing is, if you pay, you're not guaranteed that bad things don't happen anyways. So that's a whole philosophical discussion. We don't know enough. Apparently we know a little bit about the malware, and I'm really confused about how do we know so much about the malware, but I'm not going to fight we do know some things. If it turns out, so let's say we did know that this malware is associated with a particular bad terrorist group, we might be able to leverage that to get more help from federal agencies. So if we're being targeted and we know that this money is going to go, when we contact the FBI, we can go, oh, hey, so-and-so threat actors trying to get money from us. You guys might want to know.
Yep.
We're about to give them $300,000 if you don't come to our help. Can we leverage that? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know how the FBI is going to respond. I've gone to them before, and they've been like, hey, yeah, thanks for the information. Tell us how it works out. And then other times they're like, hey, we'll have someone on site in 2 days or 2 hours, or, just retain as much data as you can. So
Right.
I don't know. I don't have a rhyme or reason for why federal agencies do the way they do sometimes.
Neither do they.
Sounds like you've got some of the trade-offs for your own personal decision, though.
Great.
So that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Last group. All right. And again, just give us the TLDR, give us the delta. What would you do that's different from the other groups?
Yeah, this will be a fairly short delta, not to take up too much of your time, but a few conclusions that could be drawn based on for instance, the patch number. The MS-19 tells us that the patch was released the year before, and the type of vulnerability in Microsoft IP stack vulnerability tells us that if you have a listening TCP service on the internet, for instance, on a Microsoft machine, that would most likely have been owned a long time ago. So this vulnerability would most likely have caused the most widespread worm issues ever seen so far on the internet if this vulnerability was real. And one additional conclusion, if the idea is to close down the network, and if you pay afterwards, how would the attacker be able to turn off the malware from activating 4 hours later if it doesn't have network connectivity? So if you seal off the networks, there is no point of paying from my point of view. And so you will not and additionally, you won't be able to fix this within 4 hours clearly. And since the spectrum of affected systems was so large, you will have to contact vendors and ideally replace equipment, which cannot be done one system at a time, but rather whole segmented networks together. So the technical fix takes a long time to solve, and you will have to relocate patients in critical care. So that is the short delta, essentially.
The governor looks at you with red-rimmed eyes and silently weeps into his hands. All right, thank you. Gee, I didn't have a question. Did you? All right, great.
That's good. All right. Okay, so that was really good. I liked a lot of the responses that we had. I think that's exactly the type of thing that I wanted to come out of this with. There were some things that surprised me that I liked. I heard a couple of new things, new levels of detail, especially like, well, yank the power on some of those things because then you at least preserve logs and no one can delete them. But that's not the end of it. Sorry. Well, backing up a little bit, just by show of hands, did anyone, like your first instinct is, all right, we dip into our strategic Bitcoin reserve and we grab the $300,000 out and we just drop it like that. And, we don't even have to wake up the CEO. We've already got the authorizations. No one? Okay.
That's a different kind of insurance plan.
Different kind of insurance. It's self-insurance against ransomware, right? And a lot of hospitals actually are starting to do that.
You had a lot of what-ifs there that went along with the do I pay? So
Yeah.
if you CEOs are going to know you got the $300 from a discretionary fund.
Yeah.
If we've already
Sure.
tabletop the scenario, and internally as an organization, it's not something I think anybody would feel comfortable pulling the trigger on.
Fair enough.
You know, even though the FBI tells people not to pay, most of these hospitals currently are paying.
They do.
Almost every time.
When it's $300, you just pay it. Or $300,000. When it's $300, you just pay it. When it's $300,000, you have to do some math.
Okay, so my question
Oh, okay. Hang on.
get their records back then with that number?
Most of them have been getting them back. The SamSam era for a couple months was up to 12,000, 14,000, 17,000 at a whack, and a lot of people weren't even filing an insurance claim because it didn't meet the deductible and they didn't want to have an insurance event.
I remember years ago, I used to work for a financial, and basically if you didn't hit $1 million, you weren't even filing.
Yeah.
So that's a number is an interesting number because it's below a threshold that a lot of organizations may have.
Oh, look, a new slide.
Yes, a new slide. As if from nowhere.
Wow.
So, turns out you didn't pay. And what happened the next day is the bad guys came back. So, the question about whether or not paying would make the bad guys go away or unlock you or whatever, well, it turns out they came back anyways, but they didn't come after your particular organization. They came after the entire area and said, all right, well, you've got backup plans for one company, or one hospital system. Do you have backup plans for the entire region? Oh, yeah, and we also took out your EMS. Sorry. Kind of sucks for you. So it's the same type of scenario, but it's region-wide. So now redirecting patients is not really an option. It's the next day, so you haven't had time to refill the state's strategic Bitcoin reserve. The extortionware threat is now doubled, and this is very interesting. They said your entire region is under one extortionware threat. You either pay it all, and we leave you alone, or you pay some portion of it up to all of it, and we shut you down. So less than everything is shut down. And it hits EMS and 911 systems too. So now you can't even get ambulances to places. You have to depend on the backup plans for emergency medical systems for doing that. Doug, a question.
So this is a follow-on from the first one?
This is a follow-on from the first one.
So the systems stayed online?
Which systems?
Our systems.
At the one hospital that was hit the first time? No, they're all shut down.
The system of hospitals that are...
Oh, the system. So the entire, so you had 5 hospitals, yes. Small hospitals in a region. And those are all shut down now. So that's 5 out of maybe 60 that are offline.
I guess what I'm asking is, we didn't shut everything down, but we took our things off the network. Did they, at midnight on July 4th, screw each other up, or are they still running just fine?
Oh yeah, no, they're down.
Okay, so it's a timer, not a C2.
Yeah.
Okay, because that would have been the thing is for malware analysis, I would have wanted to know that, but if it be past the date, we would watch and see, and now we know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so it's done. Your air conditioning shut off, your power shut off. The medical devices, the AMRs are all shut down. You're baking in the hot July sun. And hopefully the patients are not baking with you.
Does your adjutant general control the EMS 911 under the National Guard system, or is it fully civilian?
Don't fight the scenario.
I think Arizona switched a couple of years ago, and I think it's back. I think it's full civilian. I just made that up. That sounded pretty good. I can make stuff up too.
Trey, are you in the room?
I'm asking for Trey.
Maybe not. Okay. Well, we know people who know. But the short answer is assume it's civilian.
Okay.
Any other before we go into the Jeopardy soundtrack?
Okay.
And so it is impossible to raise the money, from what you said?
No one said it's impossible to raise the money.
You said the Bitcoin fund cannot be replenished.
No, I said it was depleted, but okay. We can go back and we can refill more Bitcoin, sure.
So you said they never paid the first time, so it's still 300.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right. Then we'll come around. We'll do some of the questions individual, but let's start 10 minutes. We'll figure around past. Yep. Sound good? And I know we still have some other questions, so we'll pop around. If it's something that's relevant to the whole group, we'll pop it up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. All right. Oh, wow, that's annoying. We're going to go in reverse order that we did last time, just so that since we're doing the deltas. And so let's start with the group over here. And who do we have? Okay. And I gave a separate small inject to each group about who had done it. And so which did we tell your group?
We were told that, actually, I can't even.
We were told that the government basically gave us what they felt was a solid attribution to an organized crime group that was involved in all sorts of nasty things, but had pretty much a constant track record of returning control of our systems if we paid the money.
On the basis of that, we thought, hey, that's great, let's pay. Because we'll leave the chasing of organized crime to the pros. That's not really hospital IT security dude's job. So save all of our information, save all of our logs, save all the malware as much as we can, enable the FBI or NSA, whoever is going to be going chasing after these guys, and enable them the best we can because they've been doing a great job of enabling us so far. Our previous response of letting other agencies know was great because now we were all working together anyways, and once they got hit, we were already working together, so that's great. So right now the job is just triaging everybody's problem, which is keeping people alive and safe. From a hospital's point of view, which is why we paid the malware in the first place. Again, switch to manual on your power, anything that's critical infrastructure, power, transport, medical, EMS 911, sorry, your phone systems are down, you're switching to your cell phones. There's other ways to skin this cat. I can't speak to Phoenix area, but I can speak to King County, which is in Seattle. NIMS, which is kind of a FEMA-based communication and emergency resource management group. We've got something made up so that, if you're a police department and one police, and let's say a county goes down but state's still up, they all have communications set up so that people can cover for each other. Same things applies for anything in critical infrastructure. Highways, airplanes, transport, medical, EMS 911, all of that's covered. So yes, while it's crappy, there are systems in play to limit the damage, and people know what's going on, and communication channels are already in play. I guess one of the things that came up beforehand was like, hey, well, if it's malware and it can't communicate on the network, it can't do anything unless it's staged malware, and that's what we were working on. Take a look at Stuxnet. Stuxnet was introduced by a USB key and needed very little network communication to the outside world to work. It was designed to work on an on a closed network. And so yeah, that's our thing. Pay, hopefully get our stuff back, and if we don't, well, I guess we'll take that step when we get to it.
Did you guys say if you paid for one in the region, so you had a level 1 trauma, or for all of them?
Well, if we could afford it, we paid for all of them. Right. So our interpretation of the risk picture in this, and let us know if this is wrong, is if you imagine the region as a pie. The first scenario is for a piece of the pie. We lose that piece of the pie. We're now looking at losing the entire rest of the pie without the ability to do anything significantly different on the mitigation front in the extended period of time, to which point, prior to the information from Jay, we were pretty much like, well, we need to risk paying if we can afford it because we can't change our mitigation strategy. And then once Jay gives us that piece of information, that's a slam dunk. Okay. So, thank you.
So, and if you take a look at it, $600K, okay, big deal. What happens if it gets out into the let's say you don't pay. You take the risk, or you think, oh no, I don't trust that organized crime group. I've heard they do bad things in the past. And it turns out that if you did pay, you'd get all your stuff back. But you didn't pay, and somebody died. Was that worth $600,000? What is that going to do to you and your organization and the media? Personally, from a morality standpoint, I think you should pay anyways because loss of life isn't something you should mess with. But from a reputational standpoint, if you're going to be cold-hearted snake like that, that's also not a good value for you. So, yeah.
You also talked about the public health response piece as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We counted the patients in the 150.
Yes. So Suzanne brought this up. We've lost the first piece of the pie. Even if we pay, we have to do the continuity operations that we had from the first scenario for the foreseeable future while we do the long-term mitigation, which is going to take more than can be achieved in an hour. So we still have to do the diversion of emergency response. We still have to do the distribution of staff and patients to other hospitals. That's a price you're going to have to pay that's, and I won't say intangible, but non-specific for an extended period of time while you remediate having lost the first piece of the pie.
So the big issue is, because it's the entire pie, this is just the way the cookie crumbled, and the proof is in the pudding because they're going to unlock the system.
Yes,
and
we'll
punt it on desserts.
We'll punt it up to DHS and HHS.
Is anybody else really hungry for pie right now?
No.
Sweet. Okay.
Jay, you're terrible.
Yay. Okay. All right.
All right. Okay.
Pay the criminals. Crime pays.
Next group.
We're going to try to end as close to on time as possible. But what,
and,
10 past?
And what? Yeah. And what? So what did we tell your group?
Said it was anonymous.
It was definitely anonymous.
It was definitely anonymous.
A non-IT, yes.
Yeah.
And they only gave. Sometimes they would unlock the systems, and sometimes they wouldn't.
So I'm going to try and go as quickly as possible for the sake of Josh's time. So we had essentially 3 priorities. Our first priority was patient care. And at this point, we assumed that we needed to essentially activate all of the hospital's contingency plans that they should already have in place for other non-cyber disasters. So activate those contingency plans. If it was this widespread, our group recommended that we also call in something like FEMA and have them come in and start helping us in terms of transporting patients to other non-affected areas. And generally, if they might have the power generating capability that we don't have, those kinds of things. So we're calling in. We're activating everybody's contingency plans. We're calling in FEMA. We're probably going to be working with HHS at that point as well. So patient care being the first priority. Simultaneously, we are also going to pay the ransom. It's not just us. The first affected hospital chain is now going to be working with the other affected hospitals. We're all going to somehow come up with $600,000 in Bitcoin. That's going to happen simultaneously with the patient care bit. Our second priority is working with the law enforcement capability, so FBI, DHS. We're going to start trying to find the indicators of compromise that we can start sharing out. The group pointed out that the first hospital who got hit probably has at least a little bit of a head start in terms of incident response, so they were recommending that first hospital group be sharing out what they've been doing, those so-called best practices that they've been doing for remediation, do that. And then our third priority was going to be the actual secondary incident response. We're trying to figure out what went wrong, how to start restoring systems. Do we need to get boots on the ground in terms of people going and replacing physical equipment, identifying how to get the physical equipment, and that kind of thing. Did I miss anything, group? Oh, PR strategy. At this point, cat's kind of out of the bag, so we're going to be very honest about what's happening. These are the affected hospitals. This is what's going on. We're going to be paying the ransom, working to improve care, working to reestablish care as quickly as possible, but at this point, trying to be coy about what's going on is no longer the right strategy. So that's us.
Great. The president just tweeted out, hospitals doing their best. Who knew cybersecurity was so hard? Let's do better together, MAGA. So, all right.
All right, very good. Third group. Team, what was your team name again?
Princess Buttercup.
I just like hearing you say it.
And what inject did you get?
So we've been notified by FBI that it's definitely a group in Russia. We think that it's because Senator McCain is at one of the affected hospitals, and that should augment our outcome.
Yes.
Okay. So first thing that we would do, now that this is actually raised to a regional level, is, we being, some polymorphic being, would do our best to work with the governor to declare a state of emergency. Second thing that happens under the state of emergency is we would activate our continuity of government plans. And those also include working with the National Guard. Patient safety being the first thing, the National Guard would have primary responsibility working and collaborating with the hospitals to triage with patient care for most critical cases on downward. But beyond that, we would also encourage that in the state of emergency, if it is declared, that we activate Homeland Security Policy Directive 5 and 7, which allow us access to funding. And that funding can be used and directed to pay the ransom, not from us in the region, but rather from the federal government of the United States.
Now, look at the superpowers of policy people.
Wonk. Beyond that, we want to coordinate with the ISPs in the region. So the 911 infrastructure is very problematic in terms of its lack of availability. They have what are called colts and cows, which is a cell on wheels and whatever, it doesn't matter. But they have infrastructure that they can deploy in order to be able to augment the lack of 911, including that some of the other continuity of government plans include working with ham radio operators. And so we would be working with hams and other people to coordinate emergency response, emergency communications, and preparedness. And we would be working with the ISPs in part, now that this has affected a larger region, both for the restoration of service for the 911 network, but also for the greater dissemination of information for indicators of compromise beyond just the healthcare industry, as now this is breached past just hospitals. This is also 911 infrastructure, public safety, national security. And we then, I think the last things would be, we'd page basically everybody with a medical license and try to get them to do response. We would cancel the fireworks for July 4th.
Good call.
And we would try and enforce a curfew to make sure that the least possible people are out in public, being drunk, driving around in their cars in the hot Arizona sun. And the last recommendation that we had was to try and test and evaluate on a single system box whether or not if rolling the clock back kills the executable itself.
What about the Russia bit? I mean, so the governor, steely eyes, et cetera, et cetera. It says, look, I'm going to be talking to the Homeland Security Department. Like, Bossert is going to call me on this. Secretary going to call me on this. Like, if it looks like this is Russia, what do you want me to say? What can we do?
Yeah, so I, as lowly hospital security IT administrator, would say, oh my God, that's so cool. You get to talk to the president, MAGA. But beyond that, I think the first piece is if this actually is a foreign state actor, right, then this should augment your response, and it should also augment your ability to allocate resources like funding to us. The second piece would be if we don't think it's a nation-state actor, but we think it's a subsidiary or some other organization, then this should probably take us to the level at which the incident response needs to start being handled by incredibly expensive, high-level contractors who work with NSA and FBI and DIA, which gives us resources beyond our meager, tiny budgets to work with second-tier higher people.
And I know we have to move on, but now that we know it's potentially an international conflict, or maybe an act of war or some sort of treaty or norms violation or Talon, also, should we maybe warn other states, or does that get handled automatically?
I thought the HSISAC just did that automatically.
Okay.
So, we should work with other states, both American states, but also potentially other state actors, European Union and other organizations, wherever this common mode failure resolves itself in consort with the also frustrations of the Russian government. That's the union we should put.
And I think this would stymie. I mean, in general, it would help, but also, and I think this, and to some degree, the next group, it might hurt a little bit because it might get you more resources. But also now there's going to be a whole DC interagency process that start to bringing in of having these people say, hundreds and thousands of people are now going to be saying, what do we do about this? And they might be getting involved in that kind of conversation.
Though it is a national holiday, and those are feds.
This would be. All right, great. I think we're good. All right, all right, thanks.
All right. Next group, who's going to speak for you? All right.
Oh, wow.
So we had a couple different things pop up in this one.
Okay, and so what inject did we give? What did we tell your group as the
you said we were screwed.
Yes.
No, but the real one was that this is where it kind of changed our thinking on this one potentially, because we were thinking of paying the ransom, but then we were told that it was actually the group that is asking for the ransom. It doesn't exist. It's actually, if anything, it's being tied to a terrorist organization. And there's also mention of a physical kinetic component that may be associated with this in the area. So definitely changes the playing field here, which...
So just if I can jump in real quick, what does the physical, walk us through what that looks like, the physical kinetic component. What does that mean to a state level? Like, is that going to mean dead people? Is that going to mean, how does that change your scenario drastically?
So this has been in TV and media, simulated in fiction for a bit here, is how do you get the most death? You cut down the the emergency response services, and then after that, then you cause your kinetic or your explosion, your physical.
So hit mass general, and then do Boston Marathon bombing.
Then you can't respond. Yeah. So, and I believe it was actually Josh. You talked about it earlier this week with the Boston Marathon, and the actual direct correlation with the extra 3 minutes to 4 minutes of commute time that it takes to go around the roads that are closed. That people with cardiac issues in the ambulance, actually the mortality rate is actually higher. Now imagine when you're having at least one potential bomb going off in an area. Now you've also taken out all of the emergency response services in that same area. You're talking mass casualties. I mean, I would think, if it's done right. I mean, I can imagine how to do it right, but that's because
moreover,
most people here could figure out in their respective areas what they would have to do. Wouldn't take too much to figure out how to really mess things up. So as far as the money goes,
and one real quick thing, if you did it like at a baseball game, how many baseball games are going to be attended the rest of the year? I like baseball, so I would hate to see that happen.
Okay.
Well, I forget which movie it was, but I don't know if it was The Kingdom or whatever, but they basically had explosion right in the big area, and it basically drew all of the emergency response services in, and then they detonated a second one right after.
Spoilers. No.
The movie's like
I think that was Deep Impact, but yeah.
That was well, it had a deep impact because it was actually in the ground. But anyways, my point is, it's this kind of scenario of destroying emergency services and causing bigger issues is not new. But I definitely say government's involved, governor, ISACs. Obviously, this is escalated up well past us. Some people talked about bringing FEMA in, which is great because after the bombs go off in Phoenix, we'll need them by the time FEMA actually finally gets there. I don't know if anybody actually lived around where Katrina hit. How fast did FEMA get there? Because my father-in-law lives down there, and I got a good idea how fast. It wasn't super fast. So I'm just saying that 4-hour time frame, whatever, that's not going to happen to get that kind of response. You may get some National Guard to move some people. Get some out of hospitals to get continued care, but the federal response, which will have to be involved because of the terrorist aspect.
I mean, and if you're going to get FEMA, then it's going to require the governor to declare a state of emergency so that he can get. Yep. Do you think you're at this place now?
If it's a reputable threat coming through intelligence sources based on what all the identified malware indicators and the senders, everything that's been relayed, then I think it's worth getting the governor to declare a state of emergency for the region. Okay. I think we've decided, based on the terroristic threat.
Well, without the terrorist threat, we get an emergency declaration.
Okay, even without the terrorist threat.
Yes.
Well, okay. So
just because we can't take emergency services, and I forget which team it was, 2 or 3, mentioned about the canceling of the fireworks. Same thing here, right? What's the last thing in the world we want to do is set off explosions when we're anticipating explosions. So we weren't going to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
Recommendations.
Yeah, so we had a few other ideas that we had been talking about.
Take back the applause.
Sorry?
We're taking back the applause.
One of them was sending non-critical patients home if possible, or to any nearby buildings that still have AC. Mm-hmm. Because the middle of July in Phoenix is not going to be, people are not going to survive. In addition, potentially shutting down traffic in order to clear the roads for emergency services and minimize any future road casualties, along with asking the security guys if they know when this exploit was, when it happened. And we're storing logs and backups that predate that in order to have some functionality of medical records.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Applause again. All right. Thank you. Fine.
Crank the camera for this one. About 12 minutes left before we're going to break. We're going to be about 10 minutes late to the happy hour. Forget to turn on. How many IT people does it take to work?
All right. So we're security people. We're not supposed to be that happy. So we can delay happy hour. What are we going to do next?
Just kind of summary to get your thoughts.
I mean, one of the things we do in these is we focus on what you do in the immediate term. But if you think about what were the conditions that allowed this to happen, one of the phrases we like to use is through our overdependence on undependable IT, we have created the conditions such that any outlier can have a profound impact on public safety, human life. Are there any policy things that could have made these systems less fragile and resilient? Did we reveal any bottlenecks that even if the EHR systems are out for your hospital, moving them to another building or having National Guard still doesn't get you access to those things? So is there any strategic wisdom gleaned from these that could make us more resilient were this to happen? Because it should concern everybody in this room that using default passwords, nothing super elite here, very realistically could have a pretty profound impact. You were going to say something?
Two things. First of all, it's still clear that people don't know who to call.
Ghostbusters.
NKIC didn't come up one time.
That's right.
There's some reasons for that.
So NKIC didn't come up, which is not surprising, but it's no.
Well, you're in the Beltway. What's the NKIC?
The National Cybersecurity and Integration Center?
Communications.
Oh, communications. Right. You got it. It's the DHS-led, supposed to be the nationwide kind of nexus for dealing with these issues. And people said, well, we call the FBI, we call DHS, which isn't really NKIC, et cetera. Anyway, I made my point. The other thing that it seemed clear to me is the biggest problem was learning how to scale assistance quickly. And something that pops to my mind is Michigan has something called the Michigan Civilian Cyber Corps. There has to be a better way to get volunteers involved much more quickly. I mean, there's just in 4 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours. I mean, FEMA, FBI, DHS CERT, all those people, they're not going to get there in time. We have to have a better way to reach out to volunteers very quickly, which IATC seems like a good start. But anyway,
Thanks.
2 points.
Is anybody else comfortable with how easy it was to do this much damage?
Yeah, I was. Yeah. Sure.
We don't know how easy it was because the technical response still would be completed to see how easy it was to do.
Oh, we know that it's happening in hospitals every day.
Yeah. I mean, there's
So
certain
it's
parts.
just a matter of coordinating.
So it's easier for the bad guys to get scale of multiple hospitals than it is for the good guys to get scale of.
That time on their side. Well, I mean, that's all the area you just summed up right now.
Most of it, yeah. And certainly some of the things that occurred to me as we were going through this, because there's a lot of ideas that I hadn't quite heard before that we were coming out, right? And it was nice to hear where there's the commonalities, and then it was nice to hear where there's the differences. Certainly when we're starting to look at public policy, right? In the first side, it doesn't necessarily surprise me if it was only a single hospital that they didn't call NKIC or DHS. In the second side, you can certainly imagine in that. And on the policy side, right, there's so much that can happen if the governor declares the emergency, right? Because then that just unlocks a whole bunch of stuff in Washington, D.C. That's in your own incident response teams, you've got those thresholds that pop up. In the U.S., if it's a declared emergency, then a whole bunch of things happen within DHS, within FEMA, within the White House, the Homeland Security Council, where they say, we know what to do, we've got these channels, and things just happen a lot easier, and it unlocks a lot of money and a lot of capability. If that doesn't happen, then then all of that stuff more or less stays locked up. There's still other things they can do, like send an away team or things like that, but you can get a lot more otherwise. So think that in mind. I mean, those are those things that can happen in policy. As technologists, we tend to have agility, subject matter expertise, and we have our hands deep in the networks and systems. Right? The government isn't going to be able to do that in general. The government brings a massive amount of resources that gives them a lot of staying power to stay on the problem for a long time, and they have other authorities. Right? If it's Russia, if it's terrorists, even if it's organized crime, they can kick in doors, they can stab people, they can do diplomatic demarches, they can do things that I assume your hospital doesn't do quite so much of. And so you've got to be thinking, but it's going to take them a long time to get there. And so in the first sign, it doesn't surprise me it didn't come up. And in the second, just start thinking about those leverages. We didn't talk much about Congress and saying what. Yeah. Right, but it's one of those things, right? Especially in the second one, say, hey, we might have to do this. The congressman, especially on the representative side, might be able to come in and say we need some extra money, or this kind of thing is happening, and they might be able to get things happening. Especially because the representatives are going to be home for the 4th of July weekend. Did you have a jump in?
Yeah, just real quick. A lot of state law, actually, some states do not allow the governor to declare a cyber-related emergency. So it enumerates. So many state laws actually, state codes enumerate the circumstances under which the government can declare an emergency and activate the National Guard. It often does not include cyber-related emergencies. New Mexico just amended its law to include that. I think North Dakota did too. And just something to keep in mind that I think if it got to this point, that would no longer matter. But it's states are thinking about this and they're just trying to react.
Yeah. And so be thinking, right, as you're thinking about can we get more money, what else can we do, the policy folks might be asking you questions that, Ray, that's dumb, right? I mean, and so but that's going to tie the hands of the policymakers, and so you can work with some of those folks, the state legislators, the state representatives in D.C., and they can help get some of those things, these folks with power with political power can make some of these things happen. You're going to jump in, Mark?
Yeah, actually, thanks for mentioning that. I had this question rattling around in my head concerning whether or not governor would actually declare a state of emergency before, that hammer had dropped, where the rest of the hospitals were basically taken out. I just don't know. There's so many factors that would play into this threat that has not yet been realized, whether or not they'd be willing, and then secondly, be able to take that additional step to deploy, spend money and deploy resources.
And a lot of it is, when I hear a lot of, colleagues and Twitter and the rest of people saying, attribution doesn't matter to technologists, you just defend yourself, you do what you need to. But you could see it makes a difference in the kinds of things that it changes your policy or changes your response space. It can have that big influence depending on who might be responsible. Doug is.
I agree, but in most cases, attribution of any worth is way beyond the hospital's resources.
Right.
I mean, it's interesting seeing that comes at a certain level of escalation. Yeah. And if you have it, it's great information to work on. But I think pretty much everyone in the first scenario was like, we don't know who it is, and we don't care. We have to react to the threat. Right. So. Right.
And that's how we try to scale it. And we're starting to run out of time. I'm just going to give one of my last observations, in that, right. These things are relatively easy to do if you're not doing these kinds of things. I mean, they're pretty easy to put together and do one, even with just your own team. Because the bad guys have a lot of stuff that advantage them. But we can do more to be agile, right? I mean, and just running through some of these practices and saying, well, what if it went like this? What if it went like that? I was really pleased to hear how many of you all had done this kind, tabletops and the rest. And we hope that this encourages you to do more. We had no idea how this was going to work. We hadn't done it quite in this fashion. And these things, when they go bad, they tend to go bad easily. I mean, they go bad smoothly, right? They fail gracefully if they get at all. And this went really well. So.
And while we might not have said this, the video, if you were here yesterday to see the video of the clinical hacking simulations we did in the ER, that was day 1. This essentially was day 2. And we had a lot more medical professionals, state, local, regional officials in the room. So they did have a state-level FEMA type response we didn't know about. And there's other levers they can pull. And when they're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But one of the things we really wanted to bring to the National Governors Association, for example, or even to Congress, and we even recommend it in the Healthcare Task Force report, is since many of the corrective actions for better defensible IT in hospitals will take 10, 15 years, one thing we can do right now is maybe a 50-state initiative, a lot more tabletop simulations, a lot more disaster planning. We do it for other things. We haven't yet done it for cyber. So if you agree, please amplify those kind of things.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've learned as we've run through some of these things with particularly a bunch of students and with Jay up at Columbia is there's a number of things we could implement today if we could just get the will of policymakers and of administration and of companies and of others to actually push that button or make that decision. And so part of what these exercises do is they reveal those really easy things that could prevent entire classes of bad things from happening where even if it's a 5-year time scale, if we see the bad effects of not doing this after year 3 of being prepared, then we're only 2 years from the fix. And we have a different set of solutions on the table than if we're starting from 0 on at Cyber 9/11. I'll drink for that later, I'm sure.
And if you aren't sick of hearing it yet, and you just experienced this whole idea of getting in front of this through simulations, through cross-pollination, look how many voices there were in this course, and look how many ideas came up because they had different experiences than you did. The idea of safer, sooner together, you just had a taste of it. And that's why I'm so committed to this mission, and I hope you are too.
And one last pitch. So we've been talking about the Cyber 912, where there's a student challenge version of this, where we bring college students, undergrad and graduate, together. So the main event's in DC, usually around April. We also hold a smaller event in New York that we hold at Columbia. We did one in Phoenix, might do one in Sydney, might do one in London, do one in Geneva. It's great to see the students come together and work through this. Some are comp sci students, some are public policy students, some are all sorts of backgrounds. So if you've got school age kids, or if you're involved with university programs, keep an eye out for those. Those are run through the Atlanta Council, through the 3 of us, and a few others. And please try and encourage those, and try and come by and judge if you can, because we do need talented judges for those. I think that's it for me.
All right, you're supposed to go to happy hour, but come back here for a congressional testimony, and you can even be a congressperson asking this guy really hard questions.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for all your help. Thank you.